Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this talk, especially the Americans under you. I can imagine that you have quite a few things to do right now for 4th of July and whatnot. I don't know. I only know that tradition from movies. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about 3D games and how I like to make them. But first, why should you care about what this weird dude has to say? Ooh, what happened? Help! Sorry. I bumped into my mouse. Okay. Okay, attempt number 2. Why should you care about what this weird dude has to say? Well, as Stefan said, I am quite active in the Bevy community. I've been using Bevy for about half of its lifetime now. And since like 1.5 years, I am also a contributor. I also use Bevy for my quote-unquote day job. I'm in academia, so it's not a job, but it's my master's thesis. So I get to have an excuse of why I can be in the Discord all day. I also wrote a whole bunch of crates over the years. Crates.io tells me it's about 12-ish, give or take, depends on how you count them. That is Bevy-specific crates, I mean. And I wanted to just quickly show you a few that are relevant to this talk. First of all, the most well-known one is Foxtrot, sitting at nearly 800 GitHub stars now, 700, 800, something like that. This started off as an attempt to do a general 3D game template for Bevy, and it's kind of derailed into this general dump of, okay, here's all of my knowledge of how 3D is supposed to work in Bevy, just at one place. It's also a really good stress test for the Bevy renderer. So far, I believe I have opened like 5 rendering-related issues that I have discovered with Foxtrot. It's great. Next up is Yarn Spinner. If you've ever used C# before, you might know this tool already. So a few years ago, some cool people made a game called Night in the Woods. And the programmers behind the dialogue drivers, they spun off their dialogue technology into an own tool called Yarn Spinner that is nowadays very well known in the Unity community. And I ported the whole thing to Rust, and the Yarn Spinner people were friendly enough to allow me to put it onto their repo and their socials and whatnot. So if you're interested in doing narrative-driven development, I can recommend you take a look at Yarn Spinner. And lastly, our latest project, this was Chain Boom, which won place number 3 in the Bevy Jam 6. So if what you're seeing on the screen right now looks interesting at all, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we will be talking about. All right. This is the most important slide for today. I'm not going to go into detail, but this is for you sitting at home later on looking at the recording. If you want to get into 3D and you have no idea, like, okay, which technology do I use? Well, I have some good and bad news for you. The bad news is Bevy is not really capable of doing full 3D games on its own yet. But the good news is there are excellent community crates for all of this. And here's my current technology stack. We'll take a peek at the most important ones today, but we do not have the time at all to go through all of this. Just know that if you need some reference for which technology to use, take a look at this cheat sheet. All right. So before we talk about the 3D project itself, we first need to create the project. And I highly, highly recommend everyone out there use the Bevy CLI Alpha for this. This has been cooking for a while now from the CLI working group, and it's planned to be upstreamed bit by bit. So I hope that this will happen soon. For now, you need to enter this fairly long command because it's not, as I said, it's not upstreamed yet. So for now, you enter the long command here to install it. And then you get this Bevy CLI. And you get access to the Bevy new command, where you enter the name of your project. And you get to select a template. And there's a couple of templates that you can use. And I want to highlight the 2D template. It's called Bevy New 2D. And can look at its GitHub page for a ton of documentation. Cards on a table. I helped contribute to this substantially, so I'm biased. I'm really, really biased about this. But in my opinion, we did quite a good job at showcasing everything here. Very important for you out there. This here shows you how to organize your Bevy app. I've had many people over the years ask me, okay, cool, I know how to do single examples and whatnot. How do I organize a full game? Well, here's the answer. And there's also a nice design document that you can read up for more organizational patterns. Again, I will not go through this like in a lecture. Look at this in your own time. I can highly recommend it. So let's show off how this works. So what we do now is Bevy, new, I'll call it cool project, and we use the 2D template. Now I've already pre-compiled it here, so we don't need to wait. But just imagine I hit enter now. There we go. And it will generate this little template here. Now, just as a very quick overview, what this shows you is different screens. Now, screens are like things that occupy the screen, the loading screen, a splash screen, a gameplay screen. And this is used with Bevy's state management. So if you've ever heard about Bevy states and you weren't quite sure what they were useful for, this is what they're useful for, to handle transitions between, okay, this was the title screen and now is the gameplay screen. Then we have some UI building blocks over here and some menus that are built of them. But the important part for today is this demo folder, because this here is where the quote unquote gameplay happens. And I'll quickly show you what this has. We'll run Bevy run. And this here is the game. Now, if you've played some of the Jam submissions, this will look very, very familiar to you because a lot of people use this template. But let's head into play. And you can see that we have this cute little ducky here that we can move around. And that's all the gameplay there is, because you're supposed to put in the rest of the gameplay. Another thing that we have is a pause menu with settings where you can drop in all of your settings. This is super important for accessibility. And you can quit to the title, restart the game, whatnot. All right. You might have just seen that I entered Bevy run, and probably a bit puzzled why I didn't just do cargo run. Well, the reason is that with Bevy run, I can pass in the web argument. And you'll see that this does some mumbo jumbo here. And now it hosts our game over here. And now, let me just restart it so you see there's a spinner and a splash screen. And now you can see that the whole shebang is running in our browser. And this here is my favorite feature about the Bevy CLI and why I really warmly recommend it to everyone out there. If you're doing 3D or not, you have to know about this, because this is not specific to the 2D template. You can just do this with every Bevy game. Just do Bevy run web, and it will run in the web. If your code also supports web, that is, obviously. But surprisingly big amount of Bevy things are just like working out of the box for web. So give it a try. If you have a Bevy project, just do Bevy run web and see if it runs on your browser. 2D template also has a nice release workflow that then pushes all of this automatically up to HIO. Good. So far, so good for... Let me just quickly move something away from my screen. There we go. That's for the CLI. But now let's get into the 3D part. You have noticed that I've only talked about 2D so far. That is because, as I said before, you need a lot of third-party packages to get 3D really, I'm not going to say running, but at least to a stage where it's nice to work with. And the most important one that I want to share with you today is Trench Broom. This is a screenshot of Trench Broom where I'm editing the level as seen in Foxtrot. Trench Broom is a level editing software that was developed for Quake, to make custom Quake maps. But over the last few years, it's become more and more open and cross-platform and whatnot. And quite a few developers are nowadays using it as their primary level editor, especially in the Godot space. Quite a few people use this. And there's also some excellent Bevy bindings. But before I get into the weeds of how to set up TrenchBroom, I first want to show you why you should be excited about it. So let me quickly do this. So when you open TrenchBroom and start a level, this is what you're greeted with. It's just a little floor over here. This is a texture that says no texture, so this will be completely invisible. I've already set up some textures here, so we can change this to a brick texture. And you will notice that the bricks are automatically tiled for you, which is nice. I've also gotten some example textures here. And if you want to extend this floor, you can hold Shift and move it like this. And you have to know that this block of geometry is called a brush. Now, when I first heard about brushes, I was a bit confused because I thought about painting brushes, you know. But yeah, this is just what it's called. This is a brush. A brush is just a general convex polygon that is solid. Well, generally it's solid. So if we loaded this into Bevy, we wouldn't see anything because there's no camera, but I have prepared this little player capsule for us. So let's plop it into the world. And now I have prepared this little adaptation of a 2D template. This is nearly the same as the 2D template from before, but there's also this third-party module that you can look at to see all the dependencies that we're on. I have open sourced this, by the way, but I will link it later as well. And inside the demo folder is our code for the player handling, level loading, things like that. Let's just run it. And you see that we are on this brush that we created before. Now this is a bit boring so far, so let's also create a little wall in here. Let's make it about this tall. Again, this is not a TrenchBroom tutorial. I just want to show you why this software might be useful for you. Let's give it a different texture. And now we can reload the level. And we have this brush over here. You see that it's solid. We cannot move through it. And that's good. Now I'll show you some more things of how this might be useful for prototyping. Let's do a second wall over here. Let's rotate it a bit so we get a nice little slope. There we go. There we go. Now the player is already on top. Let's move him back here. And let's extend this. Again, we can quit the title and start it again, and it will hot reload our level in very, very little time. And now I also want to show you, okay, we can place geometry, but that's not all we need. We also need some entities to populate the world. And I have prepared for us today some crates over here, some wooden crates. And I will reload the level, and you can see that we have the crates, and they are also physics enabled. You can see I can push them a bit around. Not sure how well this is visible when you're not playing it because the player is stepping on the crates. But yeah, oh yeah, you can see now that it moved a bit. And finally, I can also place let's take the point light. I can also place a point light, and I'll set it to show shadows. Again, reload, and there we have our very, very beautiful point light. Okay, now what this is supposed to show you is how quickly I was able to iterate on this level. Now, there are many ways to do 3D levels. I used to work primarily in Blender before I switched to TrenchBroom. Blender is also fantastic software, but my experience, you cannot get this level of iteration speed with something like Blender because there's just too many steps involved. However, here I just squiggle some walls and they're here. So this is perfect for iteration speed, which is why I very, very, very warmly recommend you all to look into TrenchBroom for 3D levels. Yeah. So I hope this convinced you that TrenchBroom is kind of cool. So the next question becomes, okay, very cool. How do we use it? So the crate that we use for this is called Bevy TrenchBroom, and fair warning, there's a lot of boilerplate in it. Very sorry about that. I may want to contribute at some point in the future to reduce the boilerplate, but right now it's a bit wordy. So we'll go through this step by step. I have pasted for you the most important code into these slides. So, and it's also on the repo. So if you want to play around with it, take a look at that. First of all, what we do is we add the Trench Broom plugins and we pass the name of the game in here. Here, our game is just called presentation because I'm boring. And then we also need a startup system. Here it's called write Trench Broom config. And what this does is it writes down our game config into the global Trench Broom directory. This is necessary in order to make sure that Trench Broom knows about your game. Otherwise, it doesn't know which kinds of entities or models you want to load. And then finally, we need to register this weird struct called world spawn. Now, world spawn, it's a bit of a weird name. It comes from Quake. It needs to have exactly this name. This is the entity that governs how our default brushes are gonna work. Now, this is a magic incantation here. You can ignore that, but the important thing here is this spawn hooks attribute. This tells Trench Broom what to do when it's spawning these brushes. In this case, what we do is we tell it to smooth by default angles. What this means is that if you have some very flat angles like this, it will actually round them down, which is very nice when you're trying to make something like an archway. So you can make it kind of jagged in Trench Broom, and it will automatically be round and bevy. And then the last thing we do is we tell it to generate convex colliders for this. I have enabled the avian backend for Trench Broom, so we'll use avian convex colliders. And once we have that, we still need to populate the scene with entities. Here, I'll show you the definition of the crate entity. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with Rust crates or anything. This is the wooden box crate. Okay. Again, a whole bunch of magic incantations up here. This is important. This tells you where to find the GLTF. And here in the spawn hooks, we even have a nice option to preload the GLTF when the game starts. And then once the crate is spawned in the world, it just gets added as a marker component, and you can react to it with a regular old observer. Here, what we do is we get this path that we gave the model up here. We get the path here. We convert it into a scene. Then we can spawn it as a regular old scene route. And here, if you have ever used Avian, this will look very, very familiar to you. We would just tell it it's a dynamic rigid body. Here we have a collider constructor hierarchy. If you've never used this was really nice. What this does is it goes through a scene, through all of its children once it has loaded. And for all meshes, it will generate a collider for this mesh. In this case, it generates a convex hull. And we also tell it to generate it with a higher density than the default, because the default is 1 kilogram per cubic meter, which is very, very, very light. So if we left it at the default density, if we ran into a crate, it will just fly all over the screen. We don't want that, so we increase the default density a bit. Okay. So that was my quick, short, and dirty introduction to how to use Trench Broom. You've also seen that we were controlling the character. We do that with a character controller called Tenwa, but you can also use your own character controller, depending on how in-depth it is. This might be easy, this might be hard, but there are many different options for how to do character controllers. So we won't go too much into depth of that. But the important thing is that I want to highlight this crate called Bevy Enhanced Input, which is slated to be the upstream successor of Bevy's current, well, kind of non-existent input handling. So I'm seeing that we're running out of time already. Time flies. So let's get through this a little bit quicker. What this does is you define a little context here, an input context. In this case, it's the context for the player. And then on this input context, you have different actions. Now we have in our demo 2 actions, move and jump. And then we bind these in this little observer. Again, look at this in detail on your own time. But basically, we just say like, okay, this is WASD for move, and we use a left stick on a gamepad. There's also some modifiers here in order that we get a vec3 as an output, so we get directly a direction in which we want to move. And the same for the jump, but the jump doesn't have a vec3 as an output, it just has a boolean. Did we jump or did we not jump? The reason why we use an input context here is that if we, for example, want to enter a vehicle, then the vehicle controls will be very different from the on-foot controls, and you can do this by swapping out the input context. Now, of course, in this case, we only have one input context. And then our actual input are triggers, which means that you do not need to care at all about scheduling these, because, if you use a 3D physics engine such as Avian, actually updating your character controller in the update schedule is wrong because the fixed schedule runs before that, and actually you get a 1 frame delay, and you don't need to care about any of that because Bevy Enhanced Input just handles its scheduling for you, and you just handle your movement whenever this observer gets triggered. If this sounded interesting to you, some further reading that I have prepared for you, here is the official first-person view model example that I contributed some while ago. This one shows you how to correctly set up cameras in first-person contexts, because in our demo, we didn't have any hands for the player. But if we had hands, this would be called a view model, and usually that is rendered using a separate camera. If you want to learn more about how and why that is done, look at that example. If the things that I just talked about, like scheduling and fixed time steps, sounded somewhat interesting, you should take a look at the fixed and physics in a fixed time step example that I contributed. There's a lot of information there that is highly relevant to 3D games. And you can also take a look at Foxtrot source code. Again, like, don't try to understand the entire thing. It's huge. Just if you care about cameras, look at the camera code and then try to steal whatever is useful for you. Okay, I think that was all in the time we're given. Yeah, thank you very much.
Awesome, Jan. Super exciting. Finally, seeing more about people using Trench Broom for 3D games and Bevy. So some questions that were coming up. Let's first one actually quickly out of the way. How did you come across Trench Broom?
I think the first time I learned about it was a whole bunch of years ago when I just Googled how to level editor, and I just saw a bunch of them, and I saw, Trench Broom, this looks old, I don't want it. So I just immediately dismissed it. I got more interested in it from watching different devlogs by other people, and I came across this great devlog by a developer called Blargis that develops a game called Blood Thief, where he talks about his how enamored he was with Blender as a level design editor, and how he created all of these pipelines, and then he threw them all in the garbage once he learned about Trench Broom. And I felt very challenged by that, because I was in the same situation. I also had my custom pipelines for Blender, and I was very protective of them. I didn't want to throw that away. I was like, okay, if someone else threw away all of their Blender stuff in favor of Trench Broom, maybe I should look into it once more.
Yeah, but did you at the time know that it was already that there were crates, or how was it?
There was another crate for it back then. It was called Quevy.
Nice.
But yeah, it's no longer relevant now that we have Bevy Trench Broom, in my opinion.
All right. So the mostly voted for question is, what would Bevy need to be at a stage where general 3D games such as RPGs, city builders, etc., are feasible to be done with it? I guess. What's your take on that?
The number one thing that we absolutely definitely before we can talk about any of this is collision detection in 3, because like right now, like, you cannot do it, right? So even if you don't use physics, even if you just want to have some kind of, if you play Zietler, you will have some kind of pathfinding in it, and for that you need to have some kind of collision detection, and for everything beyond that, you also need to have some kind of physics. So yeah, my number one thing would be a physics engine. Now, if you're following the Bevy physics space, then you will know that Avian is the go-to right now. And there's like this huge tracking issue that me and the creator set up a while ago about like what is missing in order to upstream Avian. And the current estimate for that is like, we might be there in 2 to 3 years. That's like time frame. And
But
I
why
don't
is it necessary to
personally-
upstream it?
Well, to have it in a upstream doesn't mean like take it, copy, and paste it. It's just like, okay, at this point, it's good enough as a reference implementation of how to do ECS ready physics that we could either like copy paste it, or we could create our own thing looking at Avian for guidance. Because as you're aware, there are not many ECS only engines out there. So the whole physics space in terms of ECS is pretty much unexplored. So yeah, having some kind of feature ready implementation is very, very valuable for that. Because you don't want to have breaking changes in your physics engine too much. So that would be very bad.
Is there even any reference physics engine driven by ECS at this point? Like other than Avian and Bevy?
You mean what? Sorry?
Is there even any other physics engine driven by an ECS out there aside from Avian?
Well, the Rapier integration layer, right? But there's also the Unity dots physics. I don't know how to call it, compatibility layer. Unity dots has some weird things about which things are ECS and which ones aren't, but I'd say that one is the major one. Yeah.
Is that open source? Is that something we can learn from?
I don't think it's open source, but though the last time I looked at it, Unity's licensing and like things were very different. Very different.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Could you make it hot reload the level in place? Because I think you always had to go to your menu and reload, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's just a bug that needs to be fixed in Bevy Trench Room. I was just not bothered enough by it to submit a PR. But yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah.
Right on. Nice. Okay. Do you know other active Bevy game projects using Trench Broom?
Well, I know that the users, I don't even know their real names, but I got on GitHub, they're Periwink and Brian H. They are using Trench Broom for a multiplayer thingy. I think you, Stefan, told me that Corey was using Trench Broom as well, right?
Yeah, for Varg. Yep.
For Varg, yeah, exactly. I've seen also some people just like post little progress screenshots of their thing, and I don't know how far they are, right? I didn't see a name, but it was just like, oh, cool, you make this in Trench Brew, right? And they were like, oh yeah, Trench Brew is cool, right? And we're like, oh yeah, and then that was our interaction. So yeah, I don't think it's like at a level of popularity where you could say, oh yeah, there are like hundreds of projects. No, it's not that. I would say it's still niche. But if it wasn't niche, I wouldn't be talking about this right now. I would be like, yeah, you all know Trench Brew, go use it. But the cool thing is about Trench Brew compared to something like the Blender interactions, as great as they are, is that the Bevy Trench Broom integration layer is very, I'll say, transparent. Like it goes away very quickly. So in Trench Broom itself, you're not doing anything that is Bevy specific. And that is a great sign, because you could just look at, first of all, it means that even if Bevy Trench Broom gets abandoned at some point, it will still work. There's no Bevy specific stuff in there. You just have to bump the version, basically. And second, it also means that you can use all the tutorials and knowledge and whatever that people have done for Trench Broom over the years, whether it is Godot users or Quake mappers or whatnot. So even though there's not that many people who are actively using Trench Broom right now for Bevy, I feel very comfortable in recommending it.
Yeah. I mean, especially the Godot case, I think, is important, because that's probably also requiring a lot of like how you bind Godot specific classes or whatever it's called there to entities, which would be pretty similar, I assume, to how it is done with Bevy Trench Broom.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
Right. Okay. You know what? I will leave the remaining questions for later, and we're gonna move to our second speaker,
Sure.
and then we see each other at the end for some panel conversation together. Is that okay?
Great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you
Yeah. Thank
again,
you so
everyone
much.
who listened.
Big
Tuned in.
hand for you, and see you in a bit.